Welcome to La Ventanita. I'm your host, Carlos Frías, the Miami Herald food editor, joined again after a brief break by my co-host, Amy Reyes.
Hi. Did you
How did
miss me?
we did? Although you got to admit, Alex did a pretty great job.
She did. She was great. And I
I,
thank her for filling in for me while I was gone.
I know you were flying home on that airplane, sweating bullets.
I was like, oh my God, they're going to replace
Be
me.
bad, be bad. No, we traded one white lady for another one. So
Yeah. you got a duplicate.
we did. I was like, wait, let's cast someone for this role. Who do we have in the newsroom?
Was the other white lady here?
I know. We didn't interview about her white girl stomach and whether
I
she
was
had
going
any.
to ask. She didn't go into any details like I do.
Yeah, no, we had to. I wanted to break her in softly in
I
case
know.
we ever need her to come back. I didn't want to scare her off. So,
Well,
but I'm
I
glad
have
you're
to
back.
say, on my vacation, I did a really good job with my white girl stomach in Michigan,
Hmm.
but I've never been to a seafood boil. And so my sister, like, she organized this like really amazing seafood boil. She bought this giant like cauldron, and it has this little thing underneath to heat up the water and stuff. And she got lobster, shrimps, clams, corn, potatoes, and she boiled it in this like Louisiana spicy Cajun
Like
sauce.
a vat, yeah, like a big
It
crab
was
boil.
like, dude, my
That sounds
face was
amazing.
burning. My face was burning.
Well, were you standing over it like getting a facial, kind of like getting the steam in your face, and
No, but
you
like
weren't getting up in there?
the thing that was the most painful to eat, because everything was really good. Like I even ate the lobster. I'll always eat shrimps.
What do you mean
I don't.
even ate the lobster?
Well, I told you I don't love crustaceans. I don't love seafood in that. I
That
like
can't be
fish,
helped.
but I don't love things in shells or in rocks or any, creepers
In
of the ocean.
rocks.
Creepers of the ocean. I'm not a huge fan of creepers,
Yeah.
but
You don't like to work that hard for your food.
I do not.
You want it
But
filleted.
I want it
You want
filleted,
it
presented on the
deboned.
table. No bones,
No
no bones,
bones.
no bones, no shells. Don't
No.
make me work. But
Okay.
she put them all in the vat, and then you know what she did? She just dumped it in the middle of the table,
Yeah,
and
that's
we
how you do
ate
it.
like animals.
Yeah, just like it's like what is it, the Fantastic Mr. Fox, where everybody is very erudite and
Yes.
like very human-like, and then the food comes and everybody's
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. But
that
the
is so
thing that was
funny.
the most painful to eat, I have to admit, was the corn. Because
Oh,
the corn, like it really absorbed all of the
the
Cajun
spices, yep.
seasoning. Oh
Hmm.
my God. And then you have to eat it like, and it gets all over your face.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Actually, it sounds
It was
fantastic.
good, but I couldn't stop myself. But my
Yeah,
face
no,
hurt.
I mean that's like a big thing, the big peel and eat thing. I mean, I got to say that the peel and eat thing is not a big thing in the Latin community.
Mm-mm.
That's a white people thing, I think, for the most part. The peel and
I
eat
think
shrimp, like peel
it
and eat
might be
thing.
like an American thing
It's an
because
American thing.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like it's a thing that happens in different communities in the United States. But I have to admit that I don't like working that hard to get my food.
No, no,
Mm-mm.
it's a thing, but I think that's you can get by with less food because it takes you so long to eat it that you kind of get full by the time you get to your third or fourth piece, and
Yeah,
you're
it's
like,
probably
well,
like
that
the
was
theory
great.
behind chopsticks. Like you have to work so hard to bring the food to your mouth. You appreciate your bites
Slowly in
more.
pieces, you can't just shovel it in your mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you had a good eating break and that your white girl stomach didn't act up.
Yeah. Thank you.
But did you get out to your Detroit favorite? Did you get out to get some Buddy's pizza?
This was the first vacation that I've taken in Michigan where Buddy's was not on the menu.
Wow.
However, we have discovered
Mm-hmm.
that there is a place in Miami, specifically in the Kingdom of Kendall,
Mm-hmm.
that has a very similar style of pizza to Buddy's Pizza in Detroit, which is called Vice City Pizza.
Right. We're looking at Buddy's pizza right now.
That's Buddy's Pizza. This is
Right.
not Vice City Pizza. I don't know if we have a photo of Vice City Pizza, but so Buddy's Pizza is a square Detroit style pizza that
Right.
has like the cheesy edges, which are like it's like the golden the golden ticket. You want the corner pieces because then you get two cheesy edges. You
It's
get
like
to eat them.
brownies. It's like you want the brownie edge. I mean, if you're a corner
Exactly.
person, if you're a corner piece person, which
And the
should
crust
be.
is really fluffy, like a focaccia.
Mm-hmm.
Except Buddy's Pizza started off as like a real, like a kind of divey local pizza spot in Detroit on the east side at like Conant and 6 Mile. And my family used to go there every like every week, basically. Like we lived in Buddy's Pizza. I went there for my 8th grade graduation. I went there for like my brother went there for his like wedding announcement. Like we would go there for all the things, like everything. We would go to Buddy's for like any occasion. You go to Buddy's, and
it gives me kind of Frankie's Pizza vibes. Like I get that kind of vibe. The place has been around for a long time, and obviously Frankie's Pizzas is like Miami's OG square pizza.
Right. I've never been to Frankie's before, but it probably is a similar thing because now that I've had Vice City, I can put Buddy's kind of in the perspective in the whole like pantheon of pizza.
The spectrum. We're on the spectrum.
It's on the spectrum of square pizza, and I do recognize that the affinity that I have for Buddy's is probably 95% nostalgia and 5% it's good.
Taste,
you know what I'm saying? Like the ingredients that they use may or may not be like super primo. And I felt like when I tried the Vice City pizza, square pizza, I was like, okay, they're doing something here. Like this tastes like really fresh. Like that they're doing the most. Buddy's Pizza, amazing. But it's one of those things that like, if you bring somebody who didn't grow up on it, they might be like,
you know how I know you missed Buddy's Pizza on that trip? Because I went to Vice City yesterday and I ordered some pizza and I took a picture of it and I sent it to you and I was like, hey, I'm having Detroit style pizza. And within the hour, you and your kids
I was like, let's go, children. This is the thing that exists in the, because you had told me about that place earlier.
Yeah, I've been meaning to go there for a long time.
I didn't know it was Detroit style pizza. I thought it was just like regular pizza. And so I was like, and it's been sitting there inside what, Ave Maria? Is that the name of the?
Ave Maria. For about a year. They were one of those pandemic babies. And as actually, shout out to Charlie Crespo, who is a kind of like man about town foodie guy, like eater, not foodie, because I hate that term has become more precious, and I think he's more like an out and about eater, and he loves that place because apparently they make a gluten-free version that his wife depends on. I went over there and it was really good. Yeah, definitely focaccia style, and then he uses really good ingredients. He uses that Bianco tomatoes. I'm gonna drop some knowledge on you. So that this guy Chris Bianco is like the pizza master. Like he makes some of America's best pizza. I think he was nominated for James Beard if he didn't win one just this past year. But he has like special San Marzano tomatoes grown for him. I want to say in Italy, like in a special region of San Marzano, because you can do that. You can be like, grow tomatoes for me in this patch, and I will buy all the tomatoes that grow from here.
Oh wow!
And he they're canned and imported, and it's got his name on it, and it's fantastic. I want to say it's the same ones that Old Greg's uses. I mean, this is like the top tier.
So those are the kind of tomatoes that are used in Vice City Pizza, or in this other guy's pizza.
In Vice City and in Old Greg's, both of them. And
okay, because so I have to say, I think that Buddy's Pizza is special, but I don't know if it's that extra. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know if they. Yeah. I don't know if they go that hard at Buddy's. I feel like they do some cool stuff, but like I don't think that it's not that precious. It's not that special.
It's fine. But that's the spectrum, right? Like
yeah.
Like this is your thing, and then you can go a little bit to the right and make it a little bit more artisanal. You know what I mean? You can go to the left and it ends up Pizza Hut, right?
Yeah, exactly. The thing about Vice City that I really liked, I had the I think it's called the OG cheese or something, and that had the tomato sauce, and that was delicious. Yeah. But then I had the pepperoni, and I think it's got a different name. I can't remember what they call it, but the one that has pepperonis on it,
it's
has like some kind of like sweet drizzle.
Yes, it's a Calabrian pepper honey that they drizzle over the top. So they make like a spicy, like a hot honey, and it's so subtle. It's so subtle that I was like, wait a minute, there's something sweet on my fingers. What is that? It's delicious. That's the new thing though. A lot of people are doing that. The combined, as a matter of fact, 11th Street Pizza, which is opening up a second location down the street from them, has a hot honey. Old Greg's has a hot honey. It's the new cauliflower rice, or it's the new
it's the new Brussels sprouts.
Yes, the new Brussels sprouts, exactly. And no hate, because it's delicious.
No, I like Brussels sprouts.
But everybody, certain trends do coalesce, and that's one of them.
No, I would like for the eggplant trend to come, because eggplant's good, man. If you do it right, eggplant can be really good. Like you need to go try the ratatouille at La Petite
But not
Maison.
on a pizza. We're talking about pizza, not on a pizza, right?
They could put eggplant on pizza. I bet there's a way.
I guess.
I support this. Oh, while I was gone, you know what else happened?
What'd you do? What else?
A whole lot of Bad Bunny. I was not here for any of the crazy Bad Bunny.
Ay, bendito, tengo un restaurante nuevo.
Oh my God.
Bendito nene, un restaurante.
Well, his new restaurant is called Gecko.
Yeah, he was taking a lot of selfies saying cheese.
Well, it's open, and now there's another place that Miami can go in hopes that Bad Bunny will show up one day.
I'm sure that's going to happen every week.
Yeah, it should, because
especially
look at it.
After his Bugatti got bumped into by some guy in a Lamborghini Urus.
That is tragic.
That is tragic. Yeah, that's like probably over $1 million in cars. Giving each other a slight little kiss there, right outside in front of them.
Yeah, and you can't be riding around with your Bugatti all scratched up and stuff.
You can't do that. You can't do that. But that's a car you fix. So, good luck to Bad Bunny. That restaurant, I'm too old for that clubstaurant thing. That ain't for me. I mean, maybe by some happenstance I'll end up there at some point, but I can't imagine. That ain't for me.
I would go. I would go just to see if Bad Bunny shows up.
You're still trying to be young.
Well, no, it's not that I'm trying to be young. I just want to see if Bad Bunny shows up.
Go buy concert tickets.
I'm not listen. I'm Kendall Rich. I'm not Minecraft rich.
Not Bad Bunny ticket rich.
I'm not Bad Bunny ticket rich.
Yeah, it's more like whatever. Siri, play Bad Bunny.
Yeah, that's the truth. Also, I really appreciated the whole concert via everyone else's Instagram. So I feel caught up.
Yeah, I felt like I had enough perreo in my life.
I did.
After that. So thank you for Miami for bringing that to life.
Exactly.
We also had a thing that Connie wrote about. My favorite local bar, Union Beer, was like Yelp's favorite best place in Florida to drink, which I thought was cool.
That is cool.
And it's funny because I get a text over the weekend, or last Thursday, I get a text. And it's from Alex Lackamore, friend of the program, the musical director of Hamilton. And he's like taking a selfie with Panolo because Thursday nights is when they do their pan con vite at Union. And it's just like a local place, man. It's like a cool local place. And I'm glad that they got some love.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So that was cool. Oh yeah. So I think that we have jabbered long enough because
jabbered.
Being the sandwich freak that I am, as Connie says, I'm excited about our guest today. Our guest today is Jeff Houck. So more than a year ago, Jeff told me he was working on a book that would shock the world's understanding of where the Cuban sandwich came from. Yes, we're talking about the Cuban sandwich again, the sandwich with its own Wikipedia entry. The one from Tampa and Miami people love to debate. But Jeff and the lead author on this book went beyond the debate. To write the new book, it's called The Cuban Sandwich, A History in Layers. They looked at primary sources, advertisements, restaurant menus, and newspaper articles dating back to the 1870s. The result, 2 new cities have entered the chat, as the kids say, Havana and New York. Boo. But Jeff's origin story is just as interesting. He's a former food writer, editor, and restaurant reviewer for the late Tampa Tribune, pour one out. And his work's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. And he started his journalism career, if I'm not mistaken, in Alaska. And he's truly one of the most gifted writers I know who applies his excellent journalism skills to food writing. But now he tells the food stories of Florida's oldest restaurant, the Columbia, and he's its marketing man. But he's not going to spin us today. Today we're going to talk sandwiches, my favorite topic. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. How are you guys today?
Well, I'm great, man. I'm great. I have been eager to talk to you again in person since it's funny, we've known each other. We had known each other from online, like in each other's work for years. Right. And then I went to Tampa, ready to hate on Tampa because that's what we do in Miami. And I had the nicest time at a great restaurant, one of the ones that you represent also as its marketing.
That's correct.
Remind me of the name?
It's called Ulele.
And it was fantastic, and we had such a great time, and
we
you got to meet my boy Ollie,
I did. You travel with some fun friends. I will say that.
Yeah, I do. I got to give it up for my traveling buddies for sure. But no. So I was looking forward to this book ever since you mentioned
Yeah.
it last year. I have been
Yeah.
like I just put that on the back burner, and I've been watching that and slowly stirring it for a year, waiting for it to come out.
That's the way it felt writing it. So, I'm used to daily journalism and restaurant marketing, and it's bang 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 and adrenaline, and book writing is not that. This is the first project where I've been a part of it from start to finish. So I kind of realized what it took, and it takes a different discipline. But we're the three of us, Andy Hughes and Barbara Cruz and myself, are extremely proud of it. It's been an enlightening project for some. I think it's a great exercise in general for someone to think they know about a subject and then dive deeper to prove how little you know or how many new facets there are to something.
How did you guys divide up the labor, since there's three of you working on it?
So Andy has written a couple of books, all historical based, about food history, and he did a book called From Saloons to Steakhouses. It was basically Tampa's history told in the framework of food. And so he had this 50,000 word chapter that didn't fit in that book. And he came to me and he said, listen, I think we need some profiles to wrap around it, because it was essentially an academic book at that point, a research book. I was like, hell yeah, I'm in all the way. And then he had invited Barbara Cruz, who was born in Cuba, immigrated to Miami, and now lives in Tampa and is a professor at University of South Florida. And so, Barbara clearly handled the bilingual aspects of it. And, I wrote profiles of many people, but including several South Florida sources like Norman Van Aken and Michelle Bernstein, who I'd known when I was doing full-time food writing. And, the best part about it is that, it looks like a single topic, but there's so many stories within that frame. Just talking to Michelle Bernstein about how essentially the Cuban sandwich was used as a babysitter by her mother. When she would go shopping, she would sit her at a counter with a Cuban sandwich and a drink.
That's one of my favorite stories. Those little profiles, I didn't really get into them when I was writing kind of a review of the book. But those were that was one of my favorite stories, how like Michelle Bernstein's mom would go shop, sit her at the edge of the counter, and they would give her a Cuban sandwich while the time it took her to eat that sandwich, she would get her shopping.
It was the most delicious pacifier.
But you know what I love about this book, is that it's annotated. There are 10 annotated pages, and because it has a scholarly background, but it doesn't read like that.
I hope so.
It reminded me of there's a scholarly article written by Ray Arsenal, who wrote this article called "The End of the Long Hot Summer: The Air Conditioner and Southern Culture." And I referred to it when I wrote the story about La Ventanitas, where the Ventanitas came from, how air conditioning played a role. And I remember reading that, and I was like, this doesn't read like an academic paper, although it was cited, thoroughly. But it was like this very wonderful prose that just took you through this thing and made it so delectable, and that's how I felt about this book. Like you get some history, you get like necessary Cuban history without it being pedantic, without it getting into all the like boring details and stuff. And it was just enough to like, it always kept the through line of the sandwich and how does the sandwich come into play.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, Andy was very cognizant of not dragging it through every last nook and cranny of Cuban political history and all of the upheaval that went along with that. Funny enough, air conditioning played a role in the development of the sandwich because, especially in Tampa, where cigar workers were the prime consumers, everything on the sandwich is shelf stable. That's why it doesn't have vegetation. That's why it doesn't have mayonnaise. So, you can talk pretty much about any topic about what it's like to live in Florida or South Florida and find some thread that goes through the Cuban sandwich. There's really no other food stuff that I know that has a political angle, a geographical story, an ingredient story, artisanal story. It's people can say, well, that Philly cheesesteak, this one's great or that one's great, but that's really an argument between two restaurants. The hot dog, it's Chicago versus whatever's in the water in New York. But this one is so deep, and it's not like somebody was sitting there with a pen in the early days saying, we're going to invent the mixed dough, it's going to become the Cuban, and then it's going to branch off. We should probably write all this down. Andy went to the nth degree to research all these things, and as much of an archive as we could find or what was available, we know that there's stuff on the island that God knows when anybody's going to get to it, and we really approached it from a standpoint of here's what we could find now. And but the best part about it, I thought, from my standpoint, was writing the profiles to go with it, because it shows that it's a living, breathing organism. It is still changing.
You know what it reminds me of, that the ongoing Cuban sandwich battle. It reminds me of who gets credit for inventing arepas,
right,
and pisco, because Chile and Peru go back and forth about who invented pisco. I mean, obviously Peru has definitely won the argument in the sense that like we think of it as a Peruvian drink, but the Chilenos are like, they'll go to town for it. And same thing with arepas. The Colombians and Venezuelans, they'll go to the mat for that. So I kind of love that we have this kind of thing that exists. But your book didn't really get into that. It was really more like, let's look at primary sources. Let's look at where this comes from. And I guess what surprised you the most when through Andy's research, like what surprised you, what challenged you the most when you saw about its background?
I was most surprised, I think, by the depth of what he was able to find, like you said, from primary sources, from finding menus, from finding advertisements. The fact that it went beyond being just a menu item. It was a way of life in Havana. It was something that the nobility enjoyed. It was the sandwich you brought home when you knew your wife was going to be pissed off at you for coming home late. It was,
that's a great story in that book, by the way.
It was sort of like throwing a pint of Haagen-Dazs in the door these days. You would bring it home if you came home, stumbling drunk because you had been someplace you shouldn't have been. I mean, it was great to find, instead of just artifacts.
Amy bringing Tony home some. What would you bring Tony home to have him forgive you for being out late and drinking?
Oh, that's a good question. Tony's always on a diet, so definitely not a Cuban sandwich. But something, my question, so my husband is Dominican, and I'm very accustomed to the rhythm of Cuban dining, mm-hmm. which is usually like a big meal in the afternoon and then mm-hmm. something lighter for the evening. Mm-hmm. When did Cubans on the island eat Cuban sandwiches? Were they like a weekend snack, or were they like something you would eat like between lunch and like a light dinner? Like what was the appropriate? Because I feel like Dominicans treat sandwiches like they're not real food. That's been my experience. Sandwiches are not real food to Dominicans.
I think some of that sentiment, and this is just my armchair, goes back to the idea of the bocadillo, which is a small little bite-sized sandwich that doesn't necessarily constitute a whole meal, but you can definitely, if you want to follow the roots of it all the way back to Spain, there's the concept of the sandwich goes at least that far in being a food item, but not necessarily a staple. I think that, I don't know that there was necessarily a hard and fast rule, but I think that it was primarily it started as an evening kind of item, but like I said, it was a mixed dough, which means it was a mixture of many different proteins. Everybody wants to act like there's this chiseled in granite ingredient list. And Andy's research shows that there were some really super surprising ingredients that we didn't expect.
Go on. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, I listed some of them on the last episode, Amy. If you had listened to that, you would know. But give us some. So Jeff.
Sort of, and I'll let Carlos pronounce the Spanish version of it, but sort of a liver pate was part of it. Go ahead, Carlos.
We call that una carne fría.
Yeah,
almost like a cold cut.
Yeah, that's what your nickname's going to be from now on. But then mortadella. And then the surprising thing for me was, everybody gets all up in a twist about the fact that, the Tampa Cuban has Genoa salami on it. And Miami's clearly doesn't.
It looks delicious, though, I got to tell you.
There you go. And I want to claw up my screen. But on the island, it's a mixto. It was basically a mixture of whatever proteins were available, and chorizo was one of them. So the fact is that the as best that we can tell from our research, chorizo was part of the party, and that having salami, you could see that natural evolution as it got to a place where, say, salami was prevalent because of the Sicilians who came to Tampa in the late 1800s and early 1900s to work on the Cuban into the cigar factories. You could see where somebody would make that jump or that substitution. But there was really no hard and fast mixto. Turkey was a big part of it. And we were just amazed by that, but that was just the way it was. It was a crop that was easy to maintain. It was a high yield kind of bird. They weren't doing baby duckling on the sandwich. They were using high yield proteins.
Right.
Well,
talk to me about that, because I'm curious. The first real mention of like turkey on it is like that is in conjunction with New York City in the book, like that. Those terms went together, and I remember reading and going, "Oh my God, here comes New York."
Well, yes,
trying to take credit for the Cuban sandwich.
Like yes, and no, and you and I have had the conversation about this already, but I think the other part of it is that people like to think of one migration pattern. Like if you were watching a map of birds spreading out over North America, you would think, oh, well, there's just two giant arrows, and it's not true. Tampa was a natural deep water port. So the flow from Key West to Tampa was a natural one. But people migrated everywhere. And, I think nobody would be surprised to say they migrated to New York City. They brought their food with them. And New
York has always been, for several generations of Cuban exiles a port. A port. It's a safe harbor. Like Jose Marti spent time there in the late 1800s.
My great grandfather.
When he was your great grandfather, really?
Yeah, my great grandfather came from Calabria, and and then he made his way down to Florida. So people go in all different kinds of directions. You and I have the conversation about. I don't dispute the fact that it was in New York, not at all, because it's a natural migration pattern for people to go and bring their food. But there were probably 36 newspapers that were able to write about what might be eaten or enjoyed, whereas somewhere in Tampa or Miami or somewhere in the South might have had fewer documentation of it or less documentation.
Right.
But yeah, New York, I'm right with you. I don't want to give New York anything.
Were they calling it a Cuban sandwich though, or were they calling it the mixto?
It was the mixto even in Tampa up until a certain point, and it really wasn't until it crossed over heavily into the Anglo demographic that it sort of commonly became translated as the Cuban. I know it was the mixto at our restaurant, and our farthest recipe is 1915. We serve that recipe every day.
To me, it rings like whoever named the California roll. This idea that this thing existed in Japan and they imported it to LA and they changed it to like LA flavors and they called it the California roll, and it was like, oh, the birthplace of sushi. No, that's not how that works.
That's not how it works.
That's not how it works. TikTok,
Listen, I know that Miami Subs did not invent
the sub.
The sub.
Pitbull is very offended
Pitbull
at that
invented the subs.
Hey, I invented the sub in the 305.
Yeah, that's an excellent Pitbull. I got to give you credit.
Yeah, it's a really good Pitbull. He's good at impressions. You should make him do more.
Listen, I just want to get on record on saying the word scrimp. I am so much a fan. And your Creole scrimp is impeccable. I have to tell you.
Thank you so much. I take that scrimp every chance I'll get.
I'll guarantee.
That's a really, really great. And both of you are really killing it right now.
I can go home now.
All right, so you know that I am sandwich obsessed, and
you're a sandwich freak.
I am a sandwich freak.
Did you see his sandwich press that he just got from?
We've been texting. This is. I have to confess, we've been texting back and forth about press envy, and I pulled mine out, and I threatened to start a TikTok of just doing press talk and will it press and just putting various things and crunching. It's very Letterman-esque. Carlos comes at it from a very refined place, and I'm just a matter of physics. I just want to press stuff up.
You just want to squish things and make them hot.
Yeah, it always makes them better.
Yeah, and so like that's a part of the book that I found interesting was like, all right, when does the conversation about pressing it comes into place? Because that doesn't happen till like the 50s, I want to say, or like
and
the 40s
do you
or
know
50s.
why?
And I do know why, and you're gonna tell. Well, I think I know if I read correctly that like it's because Miami's bread has a thinner eggshell crust and didn't crisp the same way, crunch the same way as like Tampa's La Segunda bread, which is closest to the actual bread baked in Cuba.
Yeah,
So they
the
needed
bread
a way
in
to-
Tampa. I don't know
So
whether
wait,
it's
they started
Waterkins.
pressing the sandwiches because the bread wasn't as good
There you go.
in Miami.
As
So-
crunchy.
So what happens is the Tampa bread,
Shade.
the Tampa.
Oh,
You know what? It's
ouch.
not shade. It's just fact. So anyway,
Dang.
Look at it. Oh, wow. That hurts so much. The way he twisted it.
Suck at that.
Twisted the knife there.
No. The Tampa
Ouch.
bread, whether you press it or not, is still crusty and yet tender. And back in the day, I have documentation of this. Even like I said, at our restaurant, they would put it in ovens, but they wouldn't press it. And it really wasn't until the late 50s, early 60s that the press came into it. I know our owners, our third generation owners, used to put stacks of plates on top of the press to get that compact kind of profile to it. But it really was the Taylor irons, and then other implements finally kind of got refined about it. But it was Miami that really brought the pressing to the equation. And, we serve them either way here. But it's, it's really about compensating for you don't want to bite into a sandwich and have it pull. You want to have a crisp bite, consistent bite every time.
Right.
And, pressing allows that. But if you get something that's too spongy, it's going to rip all the ingredients apart and make for a bad experience. But, you butter the crust and then you press it and you get good results. And it makes the Tampa version of it even more decisive of a chomp. But it definitely makes it into a special thing with the kind of pan de agua that you have down there.
I think that too.
I was gonna guess that the reason was because they didn't invent the sandwich press until the 50s. But
well, they invented the sandwich press. Well, not even I would say invented it, but it became a necessity because it was so widely enjoyed, and it's like the demand met what was needed. Like I said, they started out with just Taylor presses, just irons. And then it kind of evolved from there.
It reminds me of is Norman Van Aken tells a story about when he was a young carny working on a carnival, those moving carnivals, and he would see the Mexican workers that would come and help set up the carnivals that traveled with them, and they would bring tightly wrapped burritos from home, and they were like chorizo, torito, and they would just like keep them on them tightly wrapped and kind of foil and whatever, and it would stay warm. And I kind of feel the same way about the Cuban sandwich. Like once you began to toast it, it becomes a meal versus just like a cold snack, like a thing that you eat at lunch and whatever. It becomes like this. There's more ceremony to it, right? Like there's more richness to it. There's this idea that like the cheese melts and the ham, like if you like how Versailles does it, they grill it. Open face, ham side up, and so when they bring the grill down, it kind of caramelizes the ham, and then they put it together and finish pressing it. And there's like that changes the sandwich. That really did change it completely from like a little finger food for ladies, at a kind of like a tea time, to like this to this more egalitarian food, which
it had to move away from being a human fuel for cigar workers to being a restaurant item. And how do you charge more? Well, you do this to it or you do that to it. Swiss cheese is not the most easily melted when you pack it in with other stuff. So it's got to get to a point where it reaches a heat level that makes it less of a cheese experience and more of a creamy cheese experience. It kind of separates those layers and kind of differentiates itself between the saltiness of the ham and the mojo and the pork, and then also the mustard and the pickles and then the fat of the salami in Tampa.
You know what this sandwich sounds like though? This sandwich sounds like a leftovers sandwich, like something like at the end of the week, you take all your leftovers, you put it between some bread, and then you're like, oh,
I
let
don't
me
doubt.
taste it.
I don't doubt that it's sort of like, Monday soup. What was left over from the weekend kind of thing. It was, again. I go back to the point where it was literally a mixture of what you had, and living on an island where you had a lot of pigs and some poultry. Oh, we'll take this. We'll take this. We'll take this, and then it just sort of became codified, especially after the revolution.
Can I just say how much I'm enjoying sandwich talk today? Like, I'm really like, I feel
You're in your waters.
I feel self-actualized today.
You feel seen.
Yeah,
because
This is the church of sandwichology right
this
now.
is
This is
mass. This is mass. This is gospel right here. But you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, was that, like, at the turn of the century, if you were eating something that had multiple proteins in it, like, that was big. That was the original gold wrap steak. That was the original putting, when if you had, mortadella or like a liver pate and ham and pork, and all these things on one bite, like, you had to go source all these different kinds of meats. Like, that's very much a baller move.
If you think about it, how you make sandwiches at home, and just you setting up quote unquote mise en place. There's a certain point where if you have too many jars and too many other things, you feel like, oh, I don't know if we can afford this. You know what I mean? There's there's something to it that it's like, I'm really treating myself. This is a meal. It's not just a sandwich. But yeah, especially back in those days when sourcing of ingredients was a little bit more difficult. You can really understand why it first appealed to the upper class, and then sort of found its way down as being utilitarian, and then kind of moved back up again a little bit. I love the fact that there's still people messing with it around the world. You and I discussed that there's a place called the Tampa Sandwich Bar in Seoul, South Korea. They just moved into a brand new location.
Yep.
So you're going to love this. So they took their logo from the city of Tampa's Parks and Recreation logo. Awesome. And I found these people because they started following our restaurant on Instagram, and I found that they were doing American comfort food, but they were adding a little bit. And if you look on their menu, they do a Cuban sandwich with kimchi, which sounds exotic, but when you look at mustard and pickles, and that's how you get to the sour.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds delicious.
So after I wrote about them, they came and competed at the Cuban Sandwich Festival here in Tampa, won 2 years in a row as the people's favorite.
Oh my God.
It's like you see that it is an evolving kind of menu item, and I love that. I love to see how people take this bit and twist it and play with it. And
so I was gonna ask, like, what's something that you think that just shouldn't be on one of these sandwiches, or like, but I feel like you just said nothing. There's no limit.
I don't think that I will tell you, I am not a strict. As a member
Orthodox
as
Cuban.
a member of the Sandwich Freaks of America, I will tell you that I am not a strict constructionist. I don't get I don't get nuts if people put lettuce and tomato on it. If that's how you like it, that's how you like it. It's not how I like it, but if it makes you enjoy the sandwich, go for it. Would I put it down as doctrine? No, I wouldn't. But if you like it, you like it. And I told Carlos that arguing about sandwiches is such a first world problem, because I can tell you where they're not arguing about it, and it's on the island of Cuba right now.
Right.
This is the truth.
Where you will be hard pressed to find a Cuban sandwich. When I went years ago, that didn't exist.
You might find it in a hotel where all the American tourists are.
Did it not exist, Carlos, or you just couldn't find it? Was it a thing that they didn't? Was it not on anybody's radar?
Yeah, no, it really. I mean, I went to El Floridita, which is the restaurant that the bar really where they supposedly Hemingway hung out. They got a bronze statue of him sitting in the corner, and it's restaurant and bar. And you would think if any place is going to have it, because of the influx of tourists, this place is.
Right.
And they looked at me like I had two heads. The Cuban sandwich. They're like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I don't know." I ended up. Like I told you, Jeff, like the thing that I ate the most in Cuba was bad pizza, like pizza with very poor ingredients, and it was like that was the national food of Cuba.
Think about all the ingredients on a Cuban sandwich and trying to find that on the island right now on a consistent basis. It doesn't exist. Just even the bread alone is hard.
Yeah. So, Jeff, tell me a little bit about your background, because I know we talked about this a little bit before, but like you came to food writing like some of my favorite people, which is very circuitously,
It was. I grew up in a restaurant family, so it's always been part of my life. when I was little, they would pull me out of bed to come down to the bar and sing happy birthday to drunks in my pajamas. So it's
Good
once that's in
times.
your blood,
Those were good times.
I still have relatives who own restaurants, and so it's always been there. But yeah, I was as you mentioned, I kind of did the whole thing where you work through small papers and eventually you wind up in Alaska, and then you come back to Florida and blah blah blah, bounce around. I was at the Palm Beach Post at one point, but I started food writing out of necessity in Tampa, and didn't really want to do it. I wanted to be an editor, and that after about the third try, the editor goes, "Why don't you do it?" And I go, "Okay, I'll do it." And I just happened to be at the point in Tampa where the food life exploded in the early 2000s, and it coincided with Food Network and all the availability of groceries and ingredients that people hadn't seen before. But I was here at the exact right time and the right place for it.
Amen. Same, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Tell me about, what was your family's restaurant? Did they have a bar? Where was that?
Yeah. So my great grandfather built a hotel and motel on Paso Grill, which is in the southern tip of St. Pete Beach. And he had the Keystone Hotel and motel and lounge. And my aunt worked the restaurant, and my grandmother worked the hotel. And now my family owns the Hurricane Restaurant, which is this shrine to the grouper sandwich right on the beach. And so I was the first busboy at the Hurricane back in late 1979, I think.
Wow.
And just you know what the smell of a dishwasher food trap smells like from 1,000 miles away after you've spent that time. You know what the bar well with the spongy scrubbers smells like. And it's just I can't imagine living in any other way, and being able to tell food stories still by what I do is an amazing experience. But the Cuban Sandwich kind of came in along those ways. I lived in St. Pete. Cuban Sandwich was not a thing in St. Pete where it was in Tampa, and that's only a half-hour car ride. And then when we got back to Tampa, I kind of rediscovered it again in the early 2000s, and then started writing about it.
Cool. Yeah. What taught you to love writing, or who taught you that you were any good at it, and that's something that you wanted to do?
I'm still asking that question. I appreciate your kind compliments every day. I think it was a combination of things. I always tell people you learn how to write by reading good writing. Mm-hmm. And you find the voice that kind of sounds like yours. You kind of do a little writing karaoke for a while until you find your own voice. Yep. And then before you know it, you have a style and you have a passion. And, I will admit that I went close to Hunter S. Thompson and then backed away. I went close to Fran Lebowitz and I backed away. Mm-hmm. You have these little dalliances with voices that kind of connect with you. But at a certain point, I was lucky enough to kind of have an editor or two who let me write in my own voice and let people find me. And, once you do that, you create a little bonfire. Not everybody digs that bonfire, but the people who do really do. And that's really what happened with the coverage of food in Tampa in the early 2000s was people started to find their identity again in Tampa. It wasn't a new thing. In Tampa, food was the first visitor attraction here. That's why people came here, was to go to Ybor City in the Latin district. That's the first thing that they marketed the city for. And so it went to sleep for a while, and then it came back with a vengeance in the past 25 years.
Is that what the restaurant that you currently do the marketing and the that was part of that whole movement?
The original one was founded as a saloon in 1903. We're in Ybor City, and the saloon was a sort of what they would call a like a little tasting room today for the Florida Brewing Company. And the Florida Brewing Company's co-owner was some guy named Ventanita Ybor. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him, but he, Ybor City was a cigar town, and they needed beer, and he would make his own beer, and he had to have his own saloons. And then one of the co-owners was the family owner who bought him out and created the Columbia Restaurant in 1905. And
I want to stop because you think about a restaurant, you're like, oh, it's a place you go and sit down or whatever. But the Columbia is like it feels like a part of a city block. It's huge.
It's a full city block.
It's is it a full city block?
Yep.
All right, full city block, 2 stories,
yep.
Spanish food, shows. It's like it really is like it's an institution.
It's an immersive experience, and it's hard to draw a parallel. It's sort of like what if Versailles mashed up with, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
it's a reflection of the family, who is a mixture of Spanish and Cuban. One of the founders was born in Matanzas, and so their menu is a mashup, just like the Cuban sandwich is a mashup.
Would it be like Casa Panza meets Versailles, Carlos? Like a Spanish and Cuban kind of mashup?
There's like a performance aspect to it, right? Because you guys, there's also like flamenco.
We have flamenco shows every night, 5 nights a week.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like, Amy, what's the place on the beach? Is it Mangoes? Which is the...
Yeah, Mangoes, but that's
right,
Caribbean...
All right, so imagine trying that in Versailles together. So like performance and big and grandeur, and the place is
even as grand as Versace Mansion. The family approaches art and hospitality and entertainment and flavors as one holistic thing. Even music. The third generation owners were concert violinists and a concert Juilliard trained pianist, and that's how they kept the Columbia alive during those days, because Ybor City was dying, and they would provide entertainment shows. So, the thing about it is that the Columbia and Tampa are so intertwined that their histories kind of are simultaneously highs and lows. But Tampa was a food town back in the day. It was a huge coffee roasting town back in the early 1900s, because they poured cafecito at the table when you're rolling the cigars. So you think about, it smelled like bread and pork and coffee and all these great aromas in Ybor City back in and people, unfortunately. But the Columbia is so old that it was the first air-conditioned dining room in Tampa, in 1935.
Oh, wow.
So
did they have any Ventanitas up there?
So we had one. And up until about the 60s. And there was a reason for it, partially because to get around Jim Crow laws. So on 7th Avenue, there was a window where you could watch a lonchero making the Cuban sandwiches in the window. He was wearing a bow tie. You could watch the whole process. They made, I think it was 400 a day, and then 700 on weekends. And, it was a linchpin, because it started as a small cafe that was male only. It didn't become female friendly until Prohibition, when you could actually feel safe and women were allowed to go into establishments. So it
was like the Wild West before. Like Tampa was kind of Wild Westy.
I think that's putting it mildly. You talk about Bolita and all kinds of organized crime and things like that, and you're talking about the early days of Tampa. You're talking about some of the not so early days of Tampa.
Right. Yeah. South Florida is still full. I think of is still full of those Jim Crow era law buildings, and like if you turn on that scope as you look around the city, you see it. The world's last remaining royal castle, which was like Miami's version of the Miami-born version of a
McDonald's
White Castle. That's like a White Castle.
White Castle, yeah.
And they have a window on the side, and I remember asking the owner, who was black, and he's the person who integrated, whose presence by being inside the restaurant was the person who integrated the White Castle restaurants. I asked him about the window, and he tells me it was a Jim Crow era thing, because that same restaurant that he now owns, he couldn't sit in at one time, but he keeps the window. He's like, as a reminder of like what that.
Jackie Robinson came in. Tampa in the early days was a spring training home for the Yankees, and people would come through, and Jackie Robinson came through with the Dodgers, and our owner provided for him, and at a time when that wasn't really frowned upon. But the family who owns our restaurant was discriminated against because they were Hispanic, and so the big Gasparilla parade that we do every year, they weren't allowed to be in the crew, so they created their own crew, and they created it at the restaurant. So it's there's it's not a very clean history in any Florida city, but the great thing about Tampa is that, unlike a lot of places that have their Cuban neighborhood or their black neighborhood or their Indian neighborhood or whatever you want to call it, this was really because of the cigar factories and assimilation, an immediate assimilated city. They all married and intermingled. I think you could look, without drawing too fine a point, as the Cuban sandwich as a real metaphor for that mingling. There's a lot of people who, including a man named Andrew Tambuzzo, who's a third generation Tampa butcher, who comes from Sicilian and Cuban parents. He doesn't call his a Cuban sandwich. He calls it a mixto because he uses a mixture of both cuisines, spices, and techniques to make his sandwich, and because it's reflective of what his history is. And
it's also like, I'm guessing that's a $20 sandwich or close to it.
It's really not.
Oh,
and
not?
No, I mean, he makes his own mustard, Carlos. He makes his own pickles.
I mean, it could
he's
be
not out there. He's not out there making. He could.
Yeah,
he could. But he's not making. Swiss cheese is the thing that nobody talks about in any of the equation.
That's right.
Except until cheese. Well, no, there's a guy we found who's in the book who's in New Jersey, where there's an enormous pocket of Cuban population, and his phrase is Finlandia or nada. And I like
o muerte.
I like a guy who gets nuts about Swiss cheese as a definer for a sandwich.
Yeah. So real briefly, what has the reception been to the book so far? I mean, because it doesn't really.
They haven't run them out of town yet, so.
But yeah, I know, and so that's good.
Yeah, it's funny.
Open-minded.
There's a story that came out about a year ago before the book was anywhere near close, and we did an interview where it was a little not well received, and it was a problem because they didn't have a book to read to see what the documentation was.
Right.
I think anybody who wants to just read a headline can get nuts about anything. Hence the comments underneath your story about, well, let's talk about arepas and let's talk about pisco and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. People like to fight about food. I love it. It's a very first world problem.
Wait, people like to fight on the internet?
People like to fight about food on the internet too.
I think people like to have food fights, and then you add in ethnicities and backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. But it's not really this. The book doesn't come out until September 2nd officially, and it's already been delivered in pre-orders. So I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. I think the natural thing is to want to do the Miami versus Tampa thing. I think your story was illustrative as the need to drag New York into it, even though it might be maybe a couple lines in an entire book. But I understand why that is, because people like to feel proud of their food. And as you and I have talked about, the feeling that people have about the Cuban sandwich in Miami is different than what it is in Tampa. In Tampa, it's a historical thing. And in Cuba, it has so many more dimensions, even though they're similar to those in Tampa, and those angles exist in Tampa. It's so much more recent as an identifier that it's almost like you're arguing about two different sandwiches, because it's two different points of entry in the conversation. Right. You're going to find Cuban sandwiches almost everywhere. But I think that those two places, because of their natural proximity, and also a lot of families who live in one place have relatives in the other. People will argue about anything, but I think anybody who reads the book and gets to the end of the book and thinks, "Wow, they did a terrible job researching that." I think.
Well, I gotta say, I've never had any arguments about peanut butter and jelly. You know what I'm saying? Well, so I do think that this is a valid.
No, I would disagree. You probably have crust or no crust.
Oh,
strawberry or grape.
Strawberry or grape. Jif or Skippy. Come on.
Whatever's in the refrigerator. That's the answer. Whatever's in the fridge.
Crunchy or smooth will wipe out a room faster than any Cuban sandwich ever could.
That's true.
Texture.
That's true. But crunchy peanut butter is good. No, crunchy peanut butter is what you're supposed to eat with. You scoop it out the jar and eat it with a spoon. That's what that's for.
Is that it? Okay.
That's not for sandwiches.
So, okay. So you're saying that if I can extrapolate here, crunchy peanut butter is the Tampa Cuban bread of peanut butter, whereas the smooth is more Miami.
No, I'm saying crunchy peanut butter is the mayonnaise of Cuban sandwiches, which means you don't put it on. If you don't put it on there, it doesn't belong.
She threw a Molotov cocktail into the conversation.
You take crunchy peanut butter and you throw in some Nestle Toll House morsels, and you eat that, and then you eat it straight from the jar. That's the only thing you're going to do with crunchy peanut butter.
Amy brought the violence.
I don't hate that idea though. What if I put pineapple on a Buddy's pizza? What happens?
I don't think I would talk to you anymore.
What happens to the universe?
Yeah, the other thing I'll tell you is that I think that people are going to believe what they want to believe, regardless of a book. We were doing it for research purposes, but also for storytelling purposes. But I will say this: it's sort of like, I know Andy was quoted as saying that Miami is the capital of the Cuban sandwich, and I think that's easy to say. I look at it sort of like, well, New York City was the capital of the United States at one point. Now it's Washington. Was Philadelphia at one point. Now it's Washington. But I don't think anybody would say anything negative about New York being the heartbeat of it. Tampa is a capital. Miami is a much more energized conversation about it. Tampa is much more about civic pride and civic identity, but I think it's on the rise because Tampa's profile has risen so dramatically in the past 10 years.
Yeah. And tell me about Tampa. Tampa's changed quite a bit, man. Like again, I went there maybe a couple months ago, and found that it had really blossomed. I mean, like, I was in the neighborhood, there was like a coffee roaster, and like,
do they have Detroit style pizza though? That's the question.
They do.
Where? What?
See, you gotta come see.
Oh, I will definitely.
So what happened is that there's a little bit of a food revolution going on in the past 20 years. Can't believe it's been 20 years, but yeah, we're getting on close to that. Where it started out with craft cocktails, and there was a USVG group, and then that begat the craft brewing scene, which lit on fire here because of Cigar City Brewing, ran right up I-4 to Jacksonville and kind of spread out from there. But that was part of a previous history because there are 2 breweries in downtown Tampa back in the 30s. This is not a new thing. But, Tampa found its food voice, found that people like to live through their food here. And then now, really, any big project, like they're spending $3 billion on the airport to redo it. Their first phase was to add local food brands, and they started with 5, and now they have 90. Wow. And that was a huge thing because it was like, oh, okay. I remember writing a column for the Tribune at the time when we had the Republican convention here, and I said it's so sad that the last taste of Tampa people will have is a Chili's 2. That's just wrong. The Columbia was one of the first 5 that got a place in it. Now we have 4 restaurants in the airport, to the point where Tampa, before COVID, was issuing passports for you to go freely between airsides so you could eat. So every big project, whether it's a stadium, whether it's a new development, the new Water Street development, which is a $3 billion neighborhood they're creating from scratch in downtown. They started before they ever did any kind of turning of shovels. They started with an outdoor shipping container food court with all the Avengers of food there.
That was going to be my next question. How many food halls does Tampa have? Have you guys gone through the food hall phase yet?
I think we're still going through it. Okay. The great thing is, you have the hall on Franklin, which went in and out. There's one in Midtown now. There's a number of them, and it's the best part is that it's a lot of first time brick and mortar for people who've either been in food trucks or had hobbies or building businesses, as well as some established brands. But Tampa likes to live through its food. It just does, and it's not like other places. It is its own thing because it has its own food history. Even something like the Tampa devil crab, which did not go to Miami because the blue crabs were here in Tampa Bay. The little crab chalao that they put up in Cuban breadcrumbs is a very, very Tampa food stuff. The scacciata is a very Tampa Italian food stuff. So we have our own food ways.
My buddy Rob used to live in a rented house right on an inlet into Tampa Bay, mm-hmm. And he would just he would park his boat. He got a boat, like a little dinghy, and he would throw a crab trap out behind his house. And every day he'd get home, he'd lift up the trap, he'd take some crabs out, and he would eat crabs, like a guy from like Pennsylvania. So
Absolutely.
Rob Farley. You could just kill crabs. It's like. You just have crab every day as often as you want.
The Sicilians in Tampa used to tie chicken bones and chicken necks to a string. Screw the trap.
Yeah.
And literally put it in the water, and about 5 minutes later, you come up, you got a little string of crab pearls.
That is genius. Crab pearls. I love it.
Yeah.
Jeff, what people don't get via audio or even now video is that you were a giant of a man. And I was, I remember there's this picture of me and Jeff, like we're hugging, and I look like his son. And so I'm wondering, like,
Actually, you don't. My son is taller than me.
So I'm wondering, like, when you went to go write about restaurants, especially
Yeah.
at the time where where things were still anonymous before the internet. Like,
Right.
you're what? You're like 6'7", right? 6'5",
6'6", yeah.
6'6", and you'd come into the restaurant. That's a pretty identifiable character.
So just to correct you a little bit, not to tweak, but I was not a food critic, and I had a choice. I only had so many words for delicious, and it was the difference.
I can appreciate that. I appreciate that.
It was really the difference between writing about this world or this world, and I basically adopted it as I want to go write about every place food touches. So it was the infield of the Daytona 500. It was in the crew cabin of the Space Shuttle Discovery. It was everywhere I could find it. You know, and the approach I took was not everybody digs politics or crime or his business or sports, but everybody eats. Let's go find it. And it was just the best way to live life, telling those stories. But I never tried to be anonymous because it was really a waste of time. And I enjoyed being upfront with people about who I was, especially at places, as you know, Carlos, you go into, and it's the first time they've ever had any kind of media exposure, and you have to be professional and say, listen, you need to be ready, because when I write about this, people are going to read it and they're going to come.
Right.
And that was a huge responsibility, but one I absolutely adored.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of the job is any kind of restaurant criticism or restaurant reviewing. I find tedious at times. I find that it's much more interesting to write about the reason for being for that restaurant. You know,
food is such an on-ramp to a better life. And so many ways, even the people who started out back, they had a dream, had no idea it would be this. But you know, it's comparable to every mom and pop or anybody who starts a cupcake shop or has a food truck. It is an on-ramp to a new life. And that story will never, it's not a food story. Anytime you can display that, if it just happens to be about food, even better. But I love telling those stories because they're everywhere.
Cool. Well, Jeff, before we let you go, after such a fruitful and sandwich conversation,
I'm still singed from Amy's comment, by the way. I'm smoking over here.
Peanut butter.
Wow.
Peanut butter war.
That is brutal. So
no, it was fine.
We got to ask you.
I didn't realize I had such strong opinions about peanut butter. You showed me.
You really did. You really came out right there.
I opened you up.
Yeah. I was like, I would never argue about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then you made me realize, yes, I would. However, I don't think a peanut butter and jelly sandwich deserves a book. I think the Cuban sandwich does.
Now we're going to fight.
Yes. One of the best stories I read in the last couple of years is this guy who writes for ESPN who wrote a story about the NBA's secret food, which was the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. God, I can't think of that guy's name right now. But he wrote, like, if you do ESPN peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you'll find it, and it's fantastic. And it's about how, like, it's the power bar for NBA.
That makes sense. It's got everything you need in it.
Yeah.
Except that you should not put chunks.
Oh, it's got this.
I like how your mouth kind of make the word chunk.
Chunky peanut butter.
I don't want no chunky scrimp.
I don't want no chunky scrimps.
The scrimp's all chunky. It's chunky. It's not good. It can't be good.
Peanut butter is too chunky for my peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Amy, what are we gonna get Jeff to play Kiss, Marry, Kill with? I feel like we can always go to Cafecito.
Oh, we could get like 3 variations of the Cuban sandwich.
Well, you know he's gonna pick the one with salami.
He's gonna pick the Tampa one. Whatever.
Yeah. You know what? Throw that one out. So a Miami Cuban.
You might be surprised, but go ahead.
Okay, a Miami Cuban.
I might
be surprised.
No.
Now I gotta leave it in.
No, I love it. No, because I will tell you this. I'm a big fan of anytime anybody messes with it. So, like I said, I'm not a strict constructionist. However you're going to do it is how you're going to do it. There's one that is just as drippy and messy and soggy that I found on the outskirts of Tampa that I think about it now and I could like openly weep au jus. And so, you know, picking one of the 3, it would be like picking toothpicks.
Do the regular, Carlos. Do the cafecito.
Cafecito? Okay. How about that? So we, you know, the standard go-to is cafecito, croquetas, and pastelitos. So you got to kiss, marry, kill one. You got to kiss, marry, kill them. And what do you think?
Cafecito. I'm sorry. I have to write this down.
Okay.
Cafecito, croquetas,
And pastelitos.
Mm.
They don't call them pastelitos, which makes me mad in Tampa. Well, it tells you a little bit about
What
the
do they
culture,
call
right?
them, Carlos?
They call them turnovers, or they call them
No,
What?
some
cheese.
people call them that.
Oh.
Some people don't.
Well,
Guava
I was at
cheese.
La
No,
Segunda.
we don't call them turnovers. We call them guava cheese.
Guava
That's
cheese.
what
But I
we
was
call
at La
What?
Segunda,
But you can
and
get
they
a
called them
pastelito that's
something
not guava
different.
cheese.
Well, the cheese one, they put in its own category. They call it un quesito. They call it un quesito. A cheese pastelito, they just call un quesito. Which I was like, what is happening here? I mean, it was
See,
good.
now
It
I
was
have to learn
delicious.
new stuff. Thanks,
I know.
Tampa.
Well, I think it goes to I said this
Wow.
before, like LA also calls them turnovers, and I think it's because of how infused Miami culture is Cuban culture is in Miami, and that like you can name something what it was called on the island and everybody
Everybody
gets
get it.
it versus having to acquiesce to whatever the local thing is. But so what do you think? Pastelito, croqueta, cafecito.
Okay, I will marry the pastelito.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Look at
Carlos,
that.
is this our first marriage of pastelito
I think it
ever
might
in the
be.
history of this show?
I think so. Why the pastelito? Why
am
that
weak.
love?
I am weak. I'm a bread man. I'm weak.
Oh,
I
wow.
can see. I am a bread locust, so I can empathize with that. I can
If
sympathize.
they were out of those at La Segunda that day, it was my fault. I could eat them all day long.
Arrasó.
See, and I will tell you that cafecito. I'm a coffee man, and I will drink coffee. If I could do it in my sleep, I would. So I would kiss cafecito, which leaves the croqueta. But the only reason is, and you and I both know Seth Gonzalez, the Burger Beast, and his croqueta blues. I have massive respect for it. It's just not what I grew up with. It's been a late in life appreciation. And I love croquetas, but if I had to pick one of the three, I could live without a croqueta. I cannot live without coffee. And my God, I would not want to live without pastelitos.
I respect that. That is a very unique choice.
That
We
is,
have never had someone.
and it
go so hard for
very
pastelitos.
strong emotional connection to it. I like
Yes.
it a lot.
Yep.
Well, Jeff, we appreciate so much that you having taken this time to talk with us, and
pleasure.
we wish you so much good luck on the book because I really do think it's a great read.
Thank you very much, Carlos and Amy. I the support that you've shown is just enormous. I just hope people find an appreciation for the sandwich that they never really knew before, because something that has that much depth, I think, is something to behold and enjoyed and shared with others.
Good deal. Well, thank you.
I look
Jeff.
forward to the next one about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Let's collaborate on this. Let's collaborate. Yeah,
Definitely.
Co-author Amy Reyes.
absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks again,
Thanks,
Jeff.
guys.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
Peace out. I could talk to Jeff forever.
Oh man, he's got a lot to say about sandwiches.
Yes,
you
he
got
does.
this is the church of sandwichology.
Yeah,
for
he's
sure.
in. He's a bishop. He's a bishop in the church.
He's definitely he's handing out communion.
Does it change your opinion about like what you want on your Cuban sandwich? Like does it like make you interested in putting other things on it?
Yeah, no, I actually now I'm curious. I've never had anything but a Miami Cuban sandwich. So like the idea of putting kimchi on it to me sounds really good. And then
Somebody
I've
told me
never
that they make one in Montana that's got like bratwurst on it, like as
Damn.
the third meat,
Well,
meat.
you know, that sounds like some real Michigan type of stuff, because I don't ever eat bratwurst until I go to Michigan, like ever.
Right. Put
like,
some put some scrapple on it if you're in what is it, Pennsylvania or Ohio. Put some scrapple on that Cuban sandwich.
I think that it's a question of like access, like what's available. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So like
Right.
I think that that's kind of the takeaway from that. Like
Right.
so I would
What's
eat.
your local meat that you can? What extra local meat can you put on there?
Yeah, what can you chop up?
Oh, Jeff,
stone crab.
Stone crab. Jeff just mentioned stone crab in the chat. We have a little chat here.
I would not. I would never.
Come on, kind of like a seafood, like a crab melt kind of thing.
No, I don't
want to
work. I don't want to work hard.
Yeah, if you got a
Well,
crab
no,
all
one assumes that the crab was removed from the shell.
right, yeah, no, oh yeah, for sure.
Well, somebody has to do that for me because I'm not making that sandwich.
She's not doing that. Amy, that feels like a show.
Definitely. Now I'm gonna go make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
I'm gonna go buy a Cuban sandwich right now.
I'm gonna dedicate it to Jeff.
It's 1:00 and I'm really hungry and I don't feel like cooking anything. I'm gonna get a Latin America Cuban sandwich right now.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go eat my leftover Vice City pizza actually,
Oh,
because
that's
you
a
can
good
eat
one.
it cold and it's still good.
Yeah, that sounds pathetic, but okay. If you say so. Get out of here, white girl stomach. Bye.